Welcome to the Merick N. Ulrik podcast, episode 6. Today's guest is sci-fi and horror author James Flynn. Sit back and enjoy the interview. Welcome to the Merick N. Ulrik podcast. This is episode 6, and today I have science fiction and fantasy author, horror author, James Flynn. And Flynn grew up in England. His stories cross the boundaries of horror and science fiction and sci-fi horror. An absurdist at heart, Flynn tales tend to highlight the many paradoxes and predicaments that come attached to the human existence. James Flynn's stories have been compared to those of hit TV series The Twilight Zone due to their eeriness and atmospheric nature. Flynn's work has been featured in several magazines and podcasts, most notably Black Petals Magazine, Yellow Mama magazines, The Scare Room podcast, and Weird Mask magazine. When he is not writing, James Flynn can sometimes be found rummaging through shelves in secondhand bookstores, wandering aimlessly through the streets of the secret city in which he now lives. So thank you so much, James, for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it. I get your newsletters, and I find them very fascinating and well put together and interesting to read, and I appreciate you for being on today. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on
Yes.
my 6th guest. My pleasure. Absolutely. I do, too, like secondhand bookstores. There's something about going and getting an old book and maybe a hidden treasure, a gem. When you go in there, you never know what you're going to get. I like reading a lot of those old books from the 90s, the Forgotten Realms, or the 80s and 90s, those old science fiction or fantasy books. I really like finding those and rereading them or finding the ones I haven't read. Every book is a pleasure if you slow down and read. I love having the old paperbacks and the smell of paperbacks in my hands. So anyways, I relate to that.
Well, I prefer a second-hand bookstore to a new bookstore any day. They're more exciting. You never know what you're going to find, right?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree completely. Completely. And let's talk about something. James, you're from England, is that correct?
That's right. I'm from London, England. Yes. Yes.
That's fantastic. Now, I'm from Texas, United States, and I'm from, I guess, the Houston, Texas area. But more interesting, you're living now in Vietnam. How is that like being across the globe, living in a different country? Is that just natural for you? Something you do all the time?
No, not at all. I've been here for 5.5 years now, and it's the best thing I've ever done. It all started with a holiday back in 2018. I was living in London.
Wow.
I was having quite a rough time. I had a terrible job. I lived in a place that I didn't like, and I hadn't had a holiday in years, in about 5 years. I was very stressed. I decided I wanted to go to Southeast Asia somewhere, either Thailand, Cambodia, or Vietnam. I ended up choosing Vietnam, and I came here for 4 weeks. It was like a long 4-week holiday, and I enjoyed it so much.
Nice.
I had such a good time that when I flew back to England, I had like a breakdown. I got so depressed. It was like grey skies again and everything. Back to my old job. So I decided right then and there that I just had to come back here to Vietnam to live any way possible.
That's fantastic.
And
well, let me ask you a question.
Myself up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to get back to Vietnam, so I kind of trained myself back to teach English. So I actually teach English here when I'm not writing.
Fantastic. There's a little bit of delay, so I don't mean to speak over you, because I think we have a slight delay. So pardon me if I do. I want to apologize in advance.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
But what do you think are some misconceptions people might have of living, in such a different culture like Vietnam? I think, there's many creature comforts there that you think, they live in villages and huts, and that's just not the case for every person there. What is? We'll get to the writing. I definitely want to get to the writing, but I just find Vietnam so fascinating. What do you think are some misconceptions people might have of living in Vietnam or Thailand or some of the places like that?
Well, look, it's certainly a challenging place. If you've never been here before, the first thing that you notice is the traffic. The traffic is pretty wild here.
Oh,
Everything
yes.
seems to be in reverse. There are more bikes than cars for a start, and the general idea of waiting to pull out when there's a gap is all in reverse. You kind of pull out, and the other drivers have to swerve around you. The traffic hits you the first time.
They have a lot of small motorbikes,
A
don't
lot of
they? A
mopeds.
lot of small
Yes,
motorcycles, don't they, down there? Is that correct?
that's right. It's mainly mopeds here. You do get cars, but they're less common.
So, I traveled to Thailand in way back in 1996. So it's been years ago, but anyways, I do have a love for Asia. I think it's a great place. So let's talk about your writing. What got you started in writing? And I know you do write science fiction and horror. What got you into becoming an author? What was a motivation for that, and how did you get started?
Well, I've always been an artist in some form. I've always been a creator. Ever since I was a young boy, I've always done drawings and paintings. Ever since I can remember, since about 8 years old. And when I became a teenager, that love of art actually became a love of graffiti, street art. Every weekend as a teenager, I had a can of spray paint. I got involved in the London graffiti scene. And then when I got into my 20s, I was still an artist, but I moved away from graffiti and I started to do portraits. I started to focus on drawing portraits and painting portraits. And then when I got
Nice.
when I was in my late 20s, I started having ideas for things that I wanted to create. I started getting these complex ideas, but a paintbrush and a canvas just wasn't quite enough for me to get those ideas across.
Mm.
And I'd always been a reader at that point. I've always read books, but I'd never written one. But at that point, when I was getting these ideas that I wanted to get down and portray, and it just clicked. It just dawned on me that I needed to write a book, because in a book you can kind of portray more than a painting. You can travel to more
Right.
places and you can express more ideas with a book than you can just a single painting. So this was about 2011 when I had this idea, and I knew that it was going to be science fiction, and I knew that it was going to be
Mm-hmm.
quite dystopian. And so I think it was 2011 or 2012 that I first started to write my first book, my first novel, and it was actually called Conservation. It took me 4 long years
Ah.
to write. I started it in 2012. I finally finished it in 2016, and I published it on Amazon. And I made the classic mistake.
Okay.
I didn't have any kind of readership. I didn't have any kind of following. I just
Ah.
kind of uploaded it onto Amazon, expecting to sell lots of books, and then I hit the marketing
Yeah.
problem. It's like the classic mistake. In
Yeah.
2016, it was still possible to upload a book to Amazon and make a few sales.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't oversaturated like it
Right.
is now. But that was my first book, Conservation.
And I'm reading Exodus of Evil, and I think it's a variation of conservation because it's talking about the conservation. So, am I correct? You turned that into 3 short books. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. I published Conservation in 2016, and then after that, I published several more books. And as with anything, if you do it enough, your style progresses, and you get better and better. Your style changes. So last year, after I published a bunch of books, I looked at Conservation again, and I thought that was a long time ago now. If I read that book now, what would I
Mm-hmm.
think of it? And I sat down and read it, and after about 2 chapters, I thought, this is just not ready. It's my writing style was too basic.
James, don't feel bad because honestly, I'm doing the same thing. Like, I right now I have several of my books being turned into audiobooks. But before I handed them off to the narrators, I really wanted to re-edit them to make sure that they're easier to read for the narrators. And just a book that had written 4 years ago was drastically beneath what I would call my standards, or just simple mistakes that I wrote in the book, or bad phrasing, just bad word choices. And I do apologize. I'm from Texas, so my grammar and my English may not be as proper as the Queen's English. I feel like
Yeah.
you have a. I do love both of my narrators are from England. One's from London and one's from Scotland, and I do love the accent, and I like the old kind of. It gives me a sense of like the Tolkienist kind of. If somebody was to narrate Tolkien, I'd want somebody with a British accent, because I just feel like it's natural. I don't know why that is, but that's just in my head.
Well, most people in England like the American accent.
It's just just that beginning writing process. But I think the most important thing to early writers is just to write, and I think you did the right thing. Have you read that book, the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield? Have you by any chance read that?
War of Art? No, I don't think so. No.
He has 2 other books. He has the Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be, and the other book is Turning Pro. But he's a writer. He wrote the screenplay for Bagger Vance, that golfing movie, the movie about the golfer, Bagger Vance. I don't know if you've seen that. The Legend of Bagger Vance. But anyways, I feel like it captures a lot of the artist's struggle, You get out there and you write, and he talks about how his first 4 or 5 screenplays he wrote never got published, and the one that did finally get published was crap, and he had to go back to work. It's a struggle as an artist, but at the same time, I feel like you have some really incredible ideas with this book. I do enjoy it. I know the Exodus of Evil, so far what I've read has been, what I would say, refreshingly different. It is dystopian, obviously, but it starts off, you don't really realize it's dystopian until you get further into it. You start realizing this is very dystopian. But from the get-go, it could be a Star Trek or something like that, but it's different than that. And it's dark in some ways. It's very dark in some ways, but I've written some dark stuff too. But I so far what I've read of Exodus of Evil, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's a unique plot, and so I think it's very readable. But yes, just talking about art and things like that. So you've written Exodus of Evil or Conservation. I'm sorry, I want to go back to where we were talking. I have a scatterbrain sometimes. We're talking about how you got started writing, and so you started with Conservation.
Yeah, sorry. I started with Conservation. That was 2016. Yep. And then from there, I published a book of short stories titled The Edge of Insanity. That was quicker. By that point, I'd got into the swing of writing. That only took me about 1 or 2 years to write that one. And then after that, I published a science fiction novella called Swarm, and I published that in about 2020.
Yeah, I think I've shared that to my readers. Swarm, I've sent that off. That was a short book. I'm pretty sure I've shared that with my readers. So that book has gone out to my readership on my email list for sure. I remember that one.
Oh right, great. Yeah, I had fun writing that one.
That's good.
That's kind of dystopian as well.
Yes.
I got the idea for that story listening to a podcast actually. I was listening to a science podcast about swarm intelligence. Swarm intelligence is what certain bees and insects use when they're kind of in
hive
a group,
mind, like
a hive mind.
Yeah, like a hive mind. Yes.
And as an author, I thought, well, what would happen if there was like a human hive mind connecting lots of human brains together like that? And then I thought, how would that happen?
Wow.
And I came up with the idea of like this huge prison, like a huge correctional facility where all the prisoners' minds are kind of linked up and wired up together. And from there it just kind of wrote itself. I did have fun writing that book. That was my third book, Swarm. And then after that, I've published another book of short stories. I've written quite a few short stories. That one's called The Hand That Pulls You Under, and it's 10 short stories, mainly horror with a little bit of science fiction thrown in as well. And so by this point, it was like 2021. Yeah.
I remember why I was bringing up Stephen Pressfield, the War of Art, is because you were talking about how when you first got started, you didn't think about the marketing of your books, and I too I think sometimes when we're artists, we're getting a slight echo here, but when the artist starts out, I feel like I'm guilty of this too. You think that it's just going to sell on its own. Maybe it's a great book, but if no one hears about it, no one reads it, people don't realize that
Yeah.
it's not automatically going to sell, or it's not automatically going to get out to the public. And he said something interesting in one of his books. I can't remember which one it was, but it was that he did not focus on the marketing, but then he had an epiphany that the characters in his books were never going to live if he didn't go out there and promote them. Like, it was his job to get those characters to come to life, to let other people share them, to understand them. And so I do think, that's a kind of a noble thing in a way. It's like something kind of, it's backwards for artists. Sometimes we're so driven on art that we figured out, like, we can't wrap our brains around the fact that we have to somehow promote the art to get out to people so more people can see it. And so that's what I think. Did you find that maybe by building an email list was the thing that for you that you transitioned to how to share it with more people, or what was maybe have you figured out that whole equation?
I've tried many things.
Yep.
I've tried many things over the last few years. I've dabbled in Amazon ads,
Yep.
which I hated.
I never got a result with
I absolutely can't stand them.
Yep.
No, it didn't work for me. Loads of keywords, copy and pasting keywords, and that I hate it.
That never worked for me either. I tried.
I tried it. I even tried paying somebody. Yeah, I even found somebody online, and I was paying him $50 a month to do my Amazon ads, and I was paying him for one whole year, 12 months, and then after 1 year had passed, I did the maths. I looked at my bank statements, and it turned out I'd actually lost about $1,000.
Yeah.
It's like a complete disaster.
Yeah.
I've tried Facebook ads. I can't.
Yeah, Facebook ads have never worked for me.
Yeah. At the moment, I'm focusing on my email list and YouTube. To be honest, I make a YouTube video every 2 weeks, and I write a newsletter that goes out 2 weeks as well. So it's like a fortnightly thing. That's just right for me, It's not too intensive.
That's where we got connected, because I do like your newsletters.
Yeah, I enjoy writing.
But but I think that now for our readers, they might not understand this, but to get it out to more people, I think you're doing the right thing with offering these smaller books for people to read. Like, I noticed on Amazon, you've got a lot of books that people could pick up for either free or for 99 cents. So if somebody wanted to check out your books, it's really not a big investment to come check out Exodus of Evil, or if you want to check out even one of you have a few free books too. Have you decided that maybe do you publish primarily on Amazon, or do you publish wide? What has been your thing about that? What's your thoughts on that?
I've decided to go wide. I made that decision a few years ago. I don't think it's healthy for one company to own the complete monopoly on books. A lot of authors go KDP Select or whatever it's called. They go exclusive to Amazon. I don't really like that. I've gone wide because I like the thought that there are many different companies in the game. So I've gone wide. My books are available on Kobo, Barnes and Noble, all the rest of it. I've gone through Draft2 Digital. And most of my books are free. You can actually read. I've got about 10 books, and about 8 of them are free. So, in my opinion, there are 3 main reasons to write. Number 1, you can write for personal pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, you can read for the pleasure of other people reading your work.
Mm-hmm.
And number 3, you can write for money.
Right.
After all these years of writing, I'm still not earning serious money. I earn about £10 a month. It's something, but it's not making me rich yet. Let's put it like that. But my decision to make most of my books free is because, by making them free, I'm still getting the first 2 things. I'm getting personal pleasure from writing my books, and by giving them away for free, I get plenty of downloads every day, so other people are reading them.
I've seen that some of your books are in the top 50 or top 100 in categories on Amazon for free books. So I mean, they're definitely getting some reads for sure.
Yeah, I get about somewhere between 20 and 30 downloads per day on Amazon, and with the other platforms, it's harder to keep track. Yeah, I can't see like the exact figures with Kobo and Barnes and Noble and that. But I think I sell a few paperbacks through Drafty Digital, whereas on Amazon I get the ebook downloads. As far as I can tell, it's kind of going in that direction.
So let's talk about your writing. What gets you excited? I notice you write a lot of dystopian, you write a lot of horror, and you write science fiction. I guess was the Twilight Zone a big influence on you, or what inspires you to write? What gets you what gets your creativity going when you're writing? What kind of inspires you to write?
Look, I'm an absurdist at heart. I see human existence as quite an absurd thing. I'm quite a pessimist in a way. My work, when I write a story, my main goal is to see how crazy I can get, how dark I can get, and I like to portray the absurdity of human existence. Inside each one of my stories, there's some kind of scenario, some kind of nightmare scenario that could actually happen to any one of us. I never get supernatural. There are no ghosts in my stories. There are no werewolves, no zombies, nothing supernatural. That's not my thing. All of my horror and science fiction is grounded in reality, and to me that's scarier than any supernatural story could be anyway, because it's real, it could happen. So
yeah, the reality. I think funny because how the world's going. Sometimes I think maybe in the near future people won't read dystopian because it'll be too much like reality, and they'll be like, I need to escape with it because it's all dystopian. But no, I'm just being pessimistic, being silly. I think you're, from what I've read, I still can't wait to see how the whole series ends with Exodus of Evil. I want to see how that ends because I can't imagine how it ends yet. So I'm excited. Don't tell me because I want to see how that one ends.
Right.
I think creativity is an interesting thing. I think creativity is an interesting thing because a lot of the artists that I talk to have tell me that they knew from a young age, just like you, that you want to do something creative, or you've always had this just desire to create some kind of art. And I've talked with my last podcast I just published was a painter. His name is William K. Stidham, and he was on the last podcast that just got uploaded. That was two podcasts before this one. And he talks about how he wanted to become a novelist, and that dream didn't really happen for him. He spent like 3 years trying to publish a book, and it just didn't happen. And then he just went into watercolor painting, and then after 5 years of not being successful at painting watercolors, well, not being financially successful, by some just strike of genius, he started painting a different series, and it became successful, and he's been living off of his paintings. But what I was just saying is I just love talking to creatives because we're all kind of alike in some kind of way. Even though you might think you're different, we're all kind of alike. We have this desire to produce creativity. I think that comes from an open state of mind, like people who are more open, where we're not closed off in such a way. Like when you get down to writing, I like to say, like, you have to be in this open kind of state of mind where you're like can go wherever the book goes. I'm not a what you call a I don't what's the word? I'm not an outliner. I'm a pantser. And I don't know if that's what would you call yourself, a pantser, or you're an outliner when you're writing.
A pantser or a plotter?
Yeah, pantser or a plotter. What would you consider yourself?
Right. I'm definitely a plotter.
You're a plotter. I would have guessed it.
I am a plotter. I really am. I wasn't with conservation. When I wrote the first book in 2012, I was writing on by the seat of my pants. But I paid a price for that because later on I kind of hit some walls or dead ends that I had to work around. And I didn't like that. So now, before I even begin writing a story, I've got the basic outline in a notepad. And
Do you start with the
I generally
end?
know where the story's going to go. I I know in my head vaguely how it's going to end. Yes, I kind of do start with the end. I know what you mean. I kind of do. As time goes on, I've become more and more of a plotter.
That's interesting. Well, I guess in my head, I usually have an idea where something's going to go, but I don't ever write it down. I just kind of generally know, like, here's the hero, or this is what it's going to end. But so I don't, but I definitely don't plot scene by scene, or even like. But I find it interesting because even plotters and pantsers, it's hard. If I were to guess, I would guess you were a pantser like me. But then again, maybe just because my first read was so far is Exodus of Evil. I haven't read more, and my pardon me, because I definitely want to read more of your books and talk about them on my blog too. But that's very interesting. So I could see how you can write yourself into a problem where you can't get out of, and that's happened to me a couple times. But
yeah, so do you, as a pantser, don't you pay a price for that with your stories? Don't you ever hit a wall?
I guess what I have to do is go back and correct things sometimes. Like the problem is if you're doing a serialized work of fiction where your book one's already published, and then you go to book two and you go, wow, I should have changed this. Then that's a problem. But if you're working on I often go back to, like, I'll be on chapter 10, and then I'll be like, you know what? It would be better if this didn't happen and that guy didn't die or something like that, and I'll go back and correct that. But could definitely be a problem if you're doing a series and you get book 3 and you're like, I went on the wrong turn there. But I've been okay to I've survived serious problems being a pantser. But again, in my head, I usually have an ending, but I don't have it well defined, like just a vague ending in my mind of where I want the story to go. I find the middle of a book is the hardest part, in my opinion. Writing the middle sometimes.
Right, right. But it's certainly a more exciting way to write, being a pantser. If you just sit down and just go for it and just see what comes out. It does seem a lot more artistic, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
If I was doing horror, or if I was doing a mystery, for instance, I think I'd kind of want some outline. You got to know in your heart where it's going, I guess. So.
Yeah, true. It depends on the genre. Yeah, true.
Yes. Let's see. What I find that writing to me is what's helped me being a writer, and I don't know about you, but I came from, my background was when I was growing up, is I wanted to be a recording artist, and I still play music, so I was a songwriter, and I would write songs, and in my mind, when I was writing songs, after a while, I started realizing that, you just got to write a lot of songs, and then one or two of them will be great. And so when I started writing during the pandemic, I told myself, well, first I published one book just trying to do it. It was Brothers of Chaos, my first little short read book. And I told myself, well, I'm just going to try to do it, and I did. And I was getting 4 and 5 star reviews, so I thought that's great. But I would get the common reviews like, I just wish there wasn't so many grammar mistakes. He needed a better editor or something like that, because I wasn't editing stuff as well. Well, actually, I did have an editor back then, but I kind of started editing my own books myself. And so it gave me a little bit of encouragement to keep writing. I think it was the reviews, not so much the sales, but the reviews. I was like, okay, I can do this. But I don't know who said it, but when I started writing, I just endeavored to make really good hamburgers. So I just said, I'm not going to make filet mignon. I'm not going to try to be the next Hemingway or the next greatest person. I thought, if I can just entertain people, I thought if I can just give somebody some enjoyment where they read this story and they want to read the next book, then I was like, I kind of took myself less serious, I think, because I was trying to play music for so long, trying to impress people with music, and it got my heart broken many times when people just didn't get it, or they didn't want me, whatever, the song didn't sell or whatever. And so when I got into writing, I think I had more of like, I don't want to say humility, but I had more of like let me just try to entertain people with these stories, and that's where I came from. And I think one of my heroes is Robert E. Howard, the author of Conan. And so I thought to myself, if you look at his books, he was publishing like strange, weird tales and things like that, and it was a pulp fiction. So I kind of endeavored to write pulp fiction, something that's just entertaining to the masses. And I think maybe that's helped me a little bit. And by the way, you've been published in several magazines. How did that go? You've been in Black Petals Magazine, Yellow Mama Magazine, the Scare Room podcast, Weird Mask Magazine. How did you get those gigs, and how was that like getting your books published and stories published in those magazines? How did that come about, and what was your process with that?
It feels really good if a magazine accepts one of my stories. This was back in 2019. Black Petals Magazine was the first magazine to publish one of my stories, and after submitting my stories to like a dozen magazines and getting rejections, I finally found Black Petals Magazine, and I think they're based in America, maybe in Texas,
Wow.
I think. And I submitted a story called The Soul Destroyer, which is in The Edge of Insanity, the collection of mine called The Edge of Insanity. The Soul Destroyer. It's a very dark story, very dark. And to my surprise, I got an email back 2 weeks later saying, "Yeah, we like it. Can we publish it?"
It's great.
And what a feeling! That's the first time it happened to me. It was great, and I've submitted about 2 or 3 stories to them now because they know me. The hardest one is the first. Once a magazine knows you, they're more likely to accept your further stories. Yellow Mama Magazine is like a sister magazine to Black Petals. So that was quite. By that point, I already had my foot in the door with Black Petals. So I submitted a story to Yellow Mama, and the Scare Room podcast was a strange one. I can't remember how I found them, but I submitted 2 stories to them, and they liked them. And they actually agreed to narrate the stories. It was like a professional narrator, really well done. And they narrated 2 stories. They put them up on the website, on the podcast. This was back in 2020, I believe. And shortly after that, I think the podcast finished. And I've tried to email the narrators again and submit more stories, but there's just no response whatsoever. They've just disappeared from the face of the earth. But more recently, I've submitted some stories to other podcasts, and I'm waiting for them to be turned into stories as well. But for everyone, it's a tough gig. You're going to get about 10 rejections at least before a story gets accepted. It's just part of the craft, But it's always a great feeling when they do get accepted.
So, I follow. I talk about this guy a lot. John Cleese from the Flying Circus, or what's his name? The Monty Python. Are you familiar with him, John? Yeah.
Oh,
Monty
yeah.
Python. Yeah. He's done a bunch of talks on creativity, and it really struck a chord with me. And I like to ask my guest about this philosophy. He says that all creativity comes from a state of playfulness. Like talking about like how you were in London and everything was gloomy, and you were like, if you were in a corporate job and they sat you down at a table and said, "Now write me 14 horror stories. We want them done, by the end of the week, and be pressure on you, and we want them to be this way, and tell you how to do it." It would be like you'd be like gloomed out, like this is not what I want to do. I don't want you to tell me what to write or what that. But I feel like that's a lot of reasons why I would say, like, in my opinion, where we have a lot of movies and television and stuff that seems like it's canned or kind of like repeating the same plot, I don't know if you have that feeling where you watch something and you're like, you already know how it's going to go by like the first couple scenes, and it gets kind of boring after the second episode. And creativity is not a formula, but I think that creativity, like he says, it really struck me as true when he says that all creativity comes from a state of playfulness. It comes from that open state of mind where you're saying, well, anything can happen. I guess being a pantser, I say anything can happen within reason, but I always think to myself, how can I make this reasonable that this happens? I try to like think of it in my mind, but that's neither here nor there. Do you feel like when you're writing that you go to a different place in your head where your creativity can just flow freely? or how do you get to that state? Is there any kind of like hindrances to writing where you feel like not creative? But I always say, like, I don't believe it's just pure inspiration, like, oh, we got struck with inspiration, I just had to write. But I mean, maybe how you habitually get into a state of mind, of like an open state of mind where you're ready to write. Is there any of that happening?
Yeah, right. Well, when I plan, I'm a planner, so
Yeah.
before I even start to write, it's all planned out. I know generally how each chapter is going to go. But for me, the creativity comes in between those chapters
Mm-hmm.
as I'm writing. Most weeks I write 3 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
usually in a coffee shop these days, and it's usually on a
Okay.
Friday morning, Saturday morning, and a Sunday morning. I've got a coffee, hot coffee, and I actually listen to music now. I never used to. Vietnam can be quite noisy. There's always a lot of background noise. So, and you get people playing TikTok videos in the coffee shop and stuff. I can't concentrate with that going on next to me. So I wear these earphones. I play music now to block out the background noise, and I've got the chapters planned out, and I just get in the zone. I listen to dark soundtracks, sometimes movie soundtracks, and I just get myself in the mood, and I just get myself in this world I've created, and I just try to block out everything that's going on around me, and it's my time to get my thoughts down and get in the minds of the characters.
Isn't that wonderful, though? I mean, that's why I love writing, because, it can be lonely, but at the same time, we're not alone. We're with our characters. We have these strange, absurd characters who are dealing with their absurd problems. But like you do, I'm very similar, where you have your headphones on, your earbuds. Now, my situation is I live with my girlfriend, my daughter, and her two daughters, and during the day, there's really no silence at all. So that's why I write through the night a lot of times. And doing this podcast, actually, I might be keeping people up because I usually don't talk. I listen to my headphones on or music, so I might
Right,
be torturing
right,
some people right now with the podcast because it's after 11:30 right now here in the States, and they're probably
yeah,
going to sleep. But I have the teenagers and I have my 8-year-old, and so during the day it's noisy. Anybody could be yelling across the house for something, and it can't concentrate. But it's okay. It's the situation. We live in a small house, and that kind of situation. It is what it is. And my girlfriend is a workaholic. She's in the nursing profession, but but like you said, you put your earbuds in. I have like a soundtrack of, like, depending on what I'm writing. I have this, like, you might say, like, Lord of the Rings mood music for when I'm writing fantasy, and then I have a lot of beats and binary beats and stuff that I play when I'm trying to write some science fiction. I have one science fiction time travel kind of weird series. It's a harem fantasy. It's out there. The John
wow,
Price series. It's a
yeah,
crazy series, but it's got, somebody called it the anti-Terminator story because he goes back in time to try to save humanity. But anyways, but yeah, I do find like that state of being where you get into a place where you're, and I'm just reliving what you said. So on Friday mornings, you're going into your coffee shop. You're not heading off to the office or to work. And Saturday mornings, you're going to the coffee shop. I think that's a great because you have your time, you have your appointment for creativity, and then you put the headphones on. You're listening to music. You're drinking a cup of coffee. And even though I say you're a planner, even Brandon Sanderson says that he plots out everything on his stories. He's a fantasy author, and but where he's more creative is with the characters. He doesn't know exactly how the characters are going to be shaped until he gets there. I don't know if you plan or shape your characters perfectly or.
well, the creativity comes in dialogue, you could say, because even though I know how the scenes are going to go, I don't know what the characters are going to say exactly, and I don't know how the characters are going to react to the little nuances of the storylines. So even though it is plotted quite a lot, there's creativity within the writing process
Yes.
as I'm sitting there exploring the characters.
Yes. And the
Yeah,
dialogue comes up, and you're like, yeah, and I love those moments too. So when you have something you write and it surprises yourself, you're not sure exactly how these two characters are going to get along or what they're going to say. And sometimes I'll tell my girlfriend something that happened in my story. I'm like, you got to. It's like, don't tell me. I want to read it later. And it's
yeah.
like, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen. Um, as with any plan, if you plan anything out on paper, it very rarely goes to plan
Mm-hmm.
anyway. So a lot of my plans change as I write. So you could say
Yes.
it's a mixture of both plotting and pantsing, really.
Yes.
Um,
That's really cool. That's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah, and so it's usually in a coffee shop. Usually in a coffee shop as well, because I was just going to say, when you write indoors at home, sometimes that can kind of block the creativity. If you're in a very familiar place,
Yes.
sometimes
Yes.
I go
TV could
blank.
come on, or somebody come in.
Exactly, exactly. But if you're outside in the hustle and bustle of everyday life,
Yep.
everything's more
Yep.
vibrant, and so you kind of get the creative juices flowing a lot easier.
I don't know about you, but like if I'm home during the day, there's always so many things to do. Man, I'll say the dishes need to be done. Oh, by the way, we need laundry. Oh, by the way, I need to spend some time with my daughter, or we need to go over her homework, all kind of stuff. So it's but when you go out to write, like making your appointment, you're saying this is what I'm gonna do. Now you're like not to say the pressure's on, but you have an appointment for. And I think too, like I don't know about you, but for I don't know if other writers struggle with this. Is that I've been trying to write full time and do different things, and a lot of times people don't treat that as a real profession or a real endeavor. It's kind of like it's like, oh, he's just Joe. You can bother him anytime you want because he's at home, and that's that's
Yeah,
also a challenge.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure. It's work, you know. You do
yeah,
have to push yourself to it.
yeah,
It can be torturous. When I go to the coffee shop, even though it's something I enjoy doing, I still have to really push myself to do it. And I can't have any kind of websites open on my laptop at the same time. All I have is like I have one page for checking certain words. As
yeah,
I'm writing, I might encounter a word and think, oh, is that the correct word? I
yeah,
need to check the definition. So I have one page open for that.
yeah.
I have one page open to save my progress because I
Mm-hmm.
hate losing work as well.
Yes.
I've lost writing in the past and it
Well,
was
that's happened to me too.
awful,
It's terrible.
awful feeling.
Yeah.
I can't stand that. So I'm in the habit now of saving my work as a Word document, an RTF, a PDF, three different formats,
Yeah.
and I save the files in three different places as well.
Yeah.
I just don't want to lose writing. So I've got two pages open on my laptop, and you have to warm up as well.
The first 200 words is the hardest, I think.
Yeah, sure, sure. You're very stiff for the first chapter or the first couple of pages. You're kind of writing slowly, and the words aren't coming. But then after you've warmed up and you've had a few sips of coffee and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of in the zone. You're warmed up. It's a bit like a workout. You have to warm up first.
Stretch a little bit. I find one thing I do is what I do is like I read the chapter that I wrote maybe the previous day or the previous 4 days, and I'll go back and read that chapter and maybe start making
Yeah,
some little corrections or seeing like if I messed up anything. And I feel like that sometimes tricks my brain into keep going on to the story. So I might start at that previous chapter that I wrote, and I'll just read it and kind of if there's any corrections I need to make or typos or that's not the right word choice, then I'll go back over that. And maybe by the time I get to the next chapter, it kind of tricks my brain into like keep writing. I don't know. That's something I've kind of started to do. It
right,
kind of helps me.
right. I see. I see. I mean, I tend to edit my stories about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
I would describe the first draft of a story for me is like driving through the dark. It's quite clunky. Even though I'm a planner, it's still a kind of learn as you go experience.
Yeah.
The first draft. By draft number two, I know where I am. I've got the most
Mm-hmm.
of the stories happened, so it's a case of elaborating on things.
Edit when the whole book is done. You start your editing when the whole book is done. Is that how you do it? When the whole book's done, you start
I
editing, or?
finished I finished the first draft beginning to end, so the story is
Mm-hmm.
kind of finished, and then I start at the beginning again, just
Yep.
correct the whole thing a second time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Draft two is quite enjoyable. By draft
Yep.
number two, I'm still enjoying things,
Mm-hmm.
but when it gets to draft number three, it becomes work. It
Yeah.
becomes a bit torturous because I'm going over it again for the third
Yes.
time, and I've got OCD as well.
Yes.
I'm a bit OCD, so I've got to
Me
check every
too.
single sentence about 2 or 3 times. And by draft number three, I'm not really enjoying it as much.
Yeah.
And I sometimes do a full edit, and that's quite torturous. After that, I send my story off to a beta reader, a very nice woman I met on Facebook. And she's a beta reader, but she also looks out for grammar and punctuation for me. And
Yep.
she's really good. So she goes through my stories as well for me. So you could say they get edited about 5 times.
That's great. Produce a quality product. Yeah, Ernest Hemingway said that rewriting is writing, and I always thought of that. Sometimes I feel like I'm rushing off. I want to write the next story, but he said rewriting is writing, and I guess that's true because you want to give the best to your audience that you can. I need to get some more beta readers. It's something I used to do, and I got away from it. But I think I found a hard time finding a format to do beta readers, because what do you send them like a whole PDF, or do you send them like a, because I know like Story Origins had a beta reader format, but you dump all your documents in there and it just seems that all the formatting is it removes all formatting, so that they get this omnibus of words that are all not formatted, all that are crunched together, and people can comment on there, but the main comment I go is this needs formatting. It's hard to read because it's just one block of words. And so I haven't really found a good. I'm sure I need to find a beta reader. So if readers are listening to this, a beta reader is someone who you trust, who you can send your manuscript before it goes out to be published, who can give you comments on the plot, or comments. You can ask them questions like, were the characters believable? Did you like what you did? Did you there's a lot of things you can ask your beta readers to read. It's good to have a beta reader you trust that has a good opinion on your work. Maybe somebody who does like reading your book, so you can understand, like, they're not like, you wouldn't want a beta reader who hates horror if you're writing horror books, or if you is a prude if you write more explicit content. So you got to keep that in mind, but at the same time, it's good to have those people that you trust to read those pre-published copies. I guess you're lucky if you found a good one.
Certainly. A good beta reader is hard to find, and as writers, we work in isolation. We work for sometimes years on a story, and nobody reads it except us. And that's not a good thing, because it's, in a way, I write for myself, but I also write for other people. So I have to produce something that other people are going to like. And if you're writing on your own, like month after month, with no feedback, that's not healthy. So I always enjoy sending my story to my beta reader. But funnily enough, when I sent Exodus of Evil to my beta reader, she read the horse scene. I don't know whether you've got to the horse scene yet.
Yes, I read the horse scene. It was pretty graphic. It was pretty graphic and pretty horrifying. But at the same time, you didn't get like too explicit in detail. You told what happened. You could have gotten really dirty in the details, but in a sense, it was explicit in a sense. It was horrific, but I think it wasn't explicit in the sense that you didn't go into too much detail. I think you could have gotten to really dirty territory if you got too graphic in the details.
I could have.
But it was
pretty funny enough,
gruesome.
Funny enough, that wasn't the scene that upset my beta reader. The scene that upset her was the
bird
the
scene?
testicle scene. The testicle scene. You remember that?
Oh, my God, I haven't got there yet.
All right, I won't say anything. But I described a certain gory scene. There's a scene where blood is trickling down a man's leg, and I described it as a male menstruation. And that was the thing that upset her. It wasn't the horse scene. It was a description of a bit of blood. But no, she's very good. I'm glad to have met her. She's improved my stories a lot.
It's amazing when you find people through either your emails or stuff who will really just offer so much free opinion, there's a give and take sometimes with your readers, and that's a beautiful thing when you find readers who like your stories, but also like giving you feedback or tell you things that they want to, what they want to hear more of. So that's a beautiful thing. I think it's sometimes in my emails I send off to my email list, I try to tell more about my life, and I feel like sometimes I might turn some people off, but I always figure that's a bad term. That's a big figure. I always imagine or think that the right people will come to me and the wrong people can just go to hell. Just saying, they'll
Right.
come around and they'll the right readers. You want the people who like what you do and kind of get your vibe, and so I don't worry about people unsubscribing from my email list because those people are probably not going to read my books or So I try to.
And do you write about erotica in your stories? Do you have sex in your
Well,
stories?
I have one series that I did because I was just maybe trying to push the envelope, and I have a series called the John Price series, and that one's pretty graphic, but it's a men's adventure harem fantasy. It starts in a dystopian future, and basically this one human guy who got frozen in time, the some how do I say this is chosen to save the human race by an AI generated human who is left over, has had his consciousness transformed into like a supercomputer or AI, and so he finds this one genetic human who is an ancestor of his that was frozen in an experiment, and he tries to get him to come back to save the Earth from a hostile alien takeover that happens, somewhere in the next 100 years, like 3100 AD or something like that. And so he sends him back in time to repopulate the Earth. So there's some graphic scenes there. But he also goes
Wow.
back there to destroy the aliens, to stop the aliens. And so it's what I would say that book is a men's fantasy, a fulfillment of unrealistic expectations and fantasies and all kinds of different things that go in with that. So, but it is a beloved book, and I tell you, women read it as well. I feel like even my girlfriend likes the book. It has a bit of fantasy. It's science fiction and fantasy. Obviously, it's not something that would happen in reality, but we make it plausible. We bring the implausible to plausibility. So
And what's that one
some
called?
ways,
What's that book called?
well, the first book in the series is It says How I Got Laid and Survived the Alien Apocalypse, and then that's a prequel, How I Got Laid and Survived the Alien Apocalypse. And the second book, or really the first book in the real series, is called John Price, You Must Save the Human Race. And so it actually, I have a lot of people emailing me to continue it. So he goes back in time to 1992, and he's back in the grunge rock era of America, and he's reliving some of his glory days while he's still trying to find a way to stop the aliens who are infiltrating the society unbeknownst to everyone else and taking over governments and everything else like that. But he has a lot of new technology that he's brought back to these dark days of the 90s, and he's doing a lot of side business there. Just out of fun, he tries to intervene in Kurt Cobain's death, and so just out of fun, he goes back and tampers with the past just because out of a lark. And he's also a chain smoking cigars, and he likes bourbon, and he's injected with nanobots that kind of keep his body healthy. So like he has an argument with a robot at one point, says, it's not healthy for you to smoke all those cigars, and then blah blah blah. And he's like, well, you'll juice me full of nanobots, so I don't care. I'm gonna keep doing this.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And he picks up a pack of stray women who fall in love with him. He does, unbeknownst to him, that the AI guy has basically been putting nanobots in his body that basically make the women he mates with how do you put it, like irresistibly attracted to him for life. And so he has all these, just a harem of women that go with him. So it's a crazy story. But people like it. So
do you publish these stories under the same pen name, or do you publish under different pen names?
Yes, Merick N, Ulrik, and I might have gone off the track there about my readers. I have planned to get back to the epic fantasy of something that's not so crazy. But so I do have some epic fantasy series that's totally different than that. That's the Chronicles of Delantia and the Brothers of Chaos. That's the one world that I've crafted there. But the funny thing is that the last book in the series of the John Price series, he actually goes back to 1969, and a lot of historic events are getting. It's kind of alternate history. He meets Jimi Hendrix and Elvis Presley, and he gets involved with the Apollo moon landing, does some crazy stuff, and now he's going back in time. But you know what? Talking about situations, I don't want to ruin the book for people, but I found some situations where he goes back, and after the last book of that I did with the original series of John Price, I tried to revive it, and because people were asking me about it, and it didn't really solve the problem with the aliens yet, so they still needed to kill those aliens. So, anyways, I'm trying to think of the last book is called Love Lost in Time, and is the name of the new book that came out last, and I think I came up with some creative problems for John Price that he didn't have before because everything was going great for him, and his life was perfect. So I had to come up with some creative problems for him that now he has to save his beloved ladies that he loves and his future. And so it's interesting. I find creating problems is interesting.
Well, every good story is based on tragedy. If you have a group of people, once upon a time there's a group of people, everybody was happy and nothing went wrong. The end. Is that a story?
And everybody loved each other, and they just lived in a perfect utopian society.
It's not a story, is it?
Yeah.
It's not a story. You need tragedy.
No,
you need
not.
Problems for there to be a story.
Yes.
Sure.
So I try to throw those troubles in there. I'm working on another story. It's called the Ninja Girl, and it's going to be I'm using a different pen name for that as a ghostwriting for that. And it's going to be a music single. That's going to be a rock and roll single because there's a song called The Ninja Girl, and there's going to be a graphic novel. Well, we're trying to do a graphic novel. That's the hard part. An audiobook and an ebook, and it's a story about a young musician in the early 2000s who falls in love with this girl who they insta love. They're getting in love really fast, and then he's reflective. I was reflective when I thought of the character. I was like, well, I had a dream. It came from a dream. But anyways, the main character falls in love with this beautiful young lady who they instantly just get together. He's way out of her league. She's a 10 and he's probably at best a 7. And so, a 6 maybe. And so she's just completely falls in love with him, and and I thought to myself, why would she get with him that fast and everything? Turns out, and my first reaction in my mind as a writer was, oh, she's on drugs. She's a drug addict. Something's wrong here. And then my second reaction was, no, wait, what if she was a ninja assassin and she was trying to start a new life? She wanted to get away from it. So she clung to this first guy that she met who was nice. And so now she's with a nice guy who's a musician, not a murderer, doesn't know her for being an assassin. So at night, she's killing ninjas, trying to get out of the ninja guild so she can start a new life. She's trying to make a deal with her ninja lord to let her be free, but they don't want. Once you become a ninja assassin, it's hard to get out of the business. So
she likes him because he's normal.
Yeah, but unbeknownst to him that she's a ninja. So that goes on for a long while till they come to the conclusion. Till he figures it out because he's kind of gullible. She doesn't really get why she's leaving at night and coming back tired.
You should send that to Quentin Tarantino. It sounds a bit like
yes,
like weird. Kill Bill or something.
Yes. So I'm working with a graphic novelist and hopefully find the right one. I kind of got screwed over a little bit by somebody, but I have a couple finalists here, and we're going to try to make this into a comic book. And so we'll probably do a Kickstarter for it. Hopefully everything will work out because there's a lot more money to do a graphic novel. Plus artists, get an artist to believe in it and to do it for a reasonable price. So it's going to be pretty exciting. So that's kind of what I got. What do you got on the horizon? Anything new you're writing, James?
I'm actually working on a new book of short stories. It's going to be five stories, and it's going to be pure horror. No science fiction in it.
Wow.
Because a lot of my short story collections have been horror or science fiction horror, like a mixture of both. Mm-hmm. This one is going to be pure horror, and there's at least one story. It's loosely based on a real life experience. I've elaborated on it, but it's kind of based on a true story. And there's one story that's kind of psychological horror as well. There's another story that explores painting and visual art as well. I've kind of thrown that in there as well. I've finished 2 of the stories, and I've finished draft 2 of the 3rd story, but it's still a long way off. I'm not going to publish it probably until early next year, really. I'm still trying to promote Exodus of Evil, because
are a lot of your readers horror readers? Do you feel like are they different than science fiction readers, the horror readers? Or?
It's quite hard to tell, you know. Exodus of Evil, Book One, has got a few bad reviews because people have seen the front cover, they've seen a spaceship, Generation ship.
Yes.
It looks like your average space opera science fiction
Yes.
novel, and then they've encountered the horse scene and the kind of medieval violence and stuff, and it's put a few people off. I've got a few one-star reviews on Amazon.
No, I've got those too sometimes.
Yeah.
But mostly from my old reviews for punctuation. Or some people who have reviewed my books a 1 star and they said I couldn't get through the first 5 pages at 1 star. Well, how do you know what the book was about if you're in the first 5 pages?
Well, exactly. You shouldn't review a book unless you've read it front to back, in my opinion. But the book is quite deceiving. It looks like pure sci-fi, but really it's kind of horror. It's like dystopian, really dark horror in a way. So I'm kind of climbing back out of a hole here. I'm trying to build up some positive reviews, and I want to advertise the series.
Yes, I think it's. I need to get through the first book so I can give you an honest review. But so far, it's very entertaining, and it's kept my attention 100% because it's just like such a unique situation, and I could see how it would turn to dystopian so easily. You think about human nature and how everybody has a desire for power. Some people more than others. Probably the most narcissistic and sociopathic people have a desire for power. And how would you defend yourself against these kind of? And they're just all combined into maybe a 10-mile radius. You know, there's going to be some problems there. So I can't imagine.
It would be so problematic. It's unbelievable. If you had a group of like 1,000 people on a ship like that, all stuck together, generation after generation.
And you can't get away from them.
It'd be bound to be a war. There's no escape.
Yeah.
It'd be a war, for sure. If some kind of ideology became popular, somebody would rise to power, some kind of dictator.
Yes.
It's kind of bound to happen. I mean, I certainly wouldn't get on a generation ship after writing this book.
Yeah. Well, what about Mars? Would you go to Mars with Elon Musk? You know, maybe like when you're older, you'd be like, hey, why not just try it out?
Well, I certainly wouldn't go up there first. I wouldn't get on the first ship. Yeah. I would wait until like 50 years or so until things were developed up there.
Yeah, because you go there, there's no chance of really hope of going back. I'd be like, golly. After being in Vietnam in a tropical climate, just being to like a lifeless planet would be pretty gloomy. Depending on who. Yeah. So interesting. Well, I really interesting about your horror books. I'm not even pronouncing it right. I know I probably have a terrible Texas accent, but well, I want to hear more about the horror books and stuff that you've been writing and stuff. And it's been so great having you on. You have so much interesting things to talk about. I hope I wasn't too boring or didn't talk too much, interrupt too much. I enjoy your point of view and your writing, and I'm really glad to meet you. And I hope we can stay in touch and maybe build a friendship here and community with my podcast. And let me know whenever you have anything new to promote. And I'm geared mostly for science fiction and fantasy, so that's my thing. But I do have other things going on. So I wouldn't be too worried about your reviews of Exodus of Evil. I would just, especially since this book was something you wrote. It was like, how many years ago when you first started?
I started writing this book in 2012. Conservation. It was originally called Conservation. I started writing in 2012. So you could say it's like 12 years in the making. And I went back and reread it. It wasn't ready. I changed the name. So it went from Conservation to Exodus of Evil. And then I decided to chop it up into 3 parts and turn it into a series. So it's now Exodus of Evil books 1, 2, and 3.
I think you have a very good dystopian mind, and I'm sure that you've got all kinds of crazy scenarios that you're going to be writing in the future. And I loved having you on, man. I'm sure I didn't even scratch the scratch of everything we could talk about, especially from your point of view. But I'm so glad to have you on. I try to keep these podcasts to about an hour. And I'm jealous of you down there in Vietnam. I'd be glad to be over there and have some, I don't know, what kind of beer do they drink over there? Do they have a rice beer that's popular in Vietnam?
Tiger beer, mainly. You know Tiger beer, and you've got Saigon beer. beer's very popular here. It's like a drinking culture, which is unfortunate for me because I gave up drinking in 2014.
Sorry.
But well, no. I mean, it's quite tough because it's when you go to any kind of party or family gathering, beers all around the table. It's quite hard to say no. So sometimes I just give in and drink one or two beers. You know, sometimes you just can't refuse. But yeah, beer and coffee are the two main drinks here. There's a big coffee culture.
Yes, I would love to go visit you in Vietnam. So, well, anyways, we've got to end this podcast at some point, and I want to thank you so much for making time in your day to be on our show. It's been great talking with you. I think you need to keep it up and get us some more absurd science fiction horror. And I know you got some. I want to check out your new combination horror series book, and keep up the writing. Don't be afraid to be weird, because I think that's great.
Right. I'll bear that in mind. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for having me.
James Flynn, how can we check out your books? The best way to get in touch with you? How, if readers want to check out Exodus of Evil or any of your horror books, where is the best way to get a hold of you?
Amazon. Go to Amazon. That's your first stop. I've got Exodus of Evil. Type my name, James Flynn. Exodus of Evil. I've got Swarm. The Edge of Insanity. You can find my stuff there. I've got a YouTube channel which is called Author James Flynn. And
awesome.
Yeah, I've got an email list, so you can find that on YouTube as well.
What we're going to do is we're going to put links to your books in the description. So if you are listening to this podcast on YouTube, or if you're listening to it on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, go ahead and look in the description, and I'm going to send you a link to a free book by James Flynn that you can sign up to his email list, and you can click that book. You can download it today for free, and there's going to be some other places where you can get in contact with him, or if you want to check out some of his other books on Amazon or Kobo or Barnes & Noble, so you'll be able to find them there wherever you get your books. And so we thank James for being on the show so much, and I look forward to having him back in the future. So thank you, James. Thank you for all your insights and being open with us about your life and your writing style and your inspirations and all those interesting things we got to talk about today. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you,
I hope you have a blessed day.
It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Merick N. Ulrik podcast. Tune in next week when we interview brother and sister artist team Carla Andrea Lopez Mata and her brother Diego Lopez Mata. It's going to be a fantastic podcast. You don't want to miss it.